Hi, Alice, Dorothy, and Renee.
It's Alice Marie, I think.
Alice Marie.
From Virginia this time then.
Hi, Cindy.
Yay.
Welcome.
Hi,
I'm glad
Cindy.
you figured out how to do this from my verbal instructions left on email.
Thank you very much.
Okay, we are on air. We are on air, and I believe we have 3 other people that are going to be attending the class in person, but they did not want directions. They wanted to use their GPS, so they may be here in a half an hour or so, knowing how GPS works. Anyways, I'd like to welcome all of you, those of you who are here in person. You have the advantage, those in class, of chips and salsa, which are visitors at a distance have whatever snacks you can rustle up in the comfort of your own home. For those of you, especially Cindy and any others who are taking the online course for the first time, on the right-hand side of your screen, there should be uploaded the handouts for tonight's class. And if you double-click on that, if you've not done so already, you'll be able to download a PDF file and print that out, so you have the handouts to go along with in the class. I do recommend taking notes only because for many of us it reinforces the process of memorization, and much of learning astrology is memorization. But since it is impossible to take notes on everything said in this class, I've tried to capture as much of what is on the screen into succinct notes that you can actually take home, and if it doesn't all sink in tonight, if you're motivated to go back and look at your notes after tonight's class, you'll be able to get the information. Now, our topic for the next 6 weeks is titled Astrological Indicators of Success. So, it's been 3 months since I've taught. It's going to take me a moment to reacquaint myself with the PowerPoint system here. Great. Those of you in class that haven't signed up already, if you want to make a donation, you can in the pink envelopes. Those of you who are online, some of you have already signed up for the class and made a donation. If not, you can donate by class or whatever you'd like to do. There's always a button on the screen to donate. Since we are a nonprofit, our continued existence is dependent upon your generous gifts. All right, success. Here we have pictured a trophy, always a great symbol of success. This word is a noun, and it describes the favorable or prosperous termination of attempts or endeavors. It can also represent the attainment of wealth, position, honors, or the like. So that is our definition for success. The word success usually is a positive stimulus for us. It's something that all of us are eager to achieve. Now, from the evolutionary standpoint, evolution teaches us that success is an adaptation to an ever-changing environment. Those life forms which cannot adapt perish. The dinosaurs, they were not successful in adapting to a changing environment. What happened? From what we know thus far in science is that the changes came too quickly. Most evolutionary changes are slowly and over time, but these evolutionary changes, probably due to asteroid impact, happened too suddenly for most of these life forms to adapt. However, here's a life form that's quite successful. Those of us who live in Albuquerque euphemistically refer to these creatures as water bugs. But you can go outside on any summer night, and somehow it seems the closer you live to the river, the more prospering this community of insect life is. But we do find this in just about every neighborhood. And from what I understand, there are forms of these everywhere from the tropical jungles all the way up to the Arctic Circle. So this is a life form that has been very successful in adapting to ever-changing conditions. Success equals survival. Those of you in this room and those of you online watching this class are successful.
Yes.
Yes. Why? You have thus far survived your life. And sometimes that's all we can do. There are periods that we go through where we are under astral storms, or there are conditions going on in our environment where all we can do is survive. Now, anthropologists generally accept ruins as indicators of places where people have not been successful. However, where you have cultures that are continuously living where they did in ancestral times, that is considered to be a symbol of success. That through, again, adaptation to an ever-changing environment, people have continued to survive. Now, here in New Mexico, we do live in an environment. You can see the ruins on top. These are Pueblo Bonito out in Chaco Canyon, once a thriving civilization and now a World Heritage Site. Around the 13th century, there were incredible droughts that hit this region and completely disrupted society. Though the descendants of these people, the Pueblo people, still survive, having moved from that environment to tributaries along the Rio Grande. So we live in a great environment to be able to see both the ruin of culture, but also the successful adaptation over, a millennium of time. All right, this class is about success, but it's also about the astrological indicators of success. So one thing we have to all be on the page with, and many of you have studied astrology, one of you has not, and with our online students, I don't know at this time what the depth of study has been. So some of this information tonight may be remedial. However, we need to know what astrology is. And basically, the word astrology comes to us from the Greek, meaning star, word, or speech. So astrologos is star language. This is the logos, or the knowledge of the influence of the heavens. So astrology is the study of the interrelationship of the heavens to life and to events here on Earth. We all on the same page? Good deal. Okay, astrology actually developed, welcome.
Hi, sorry we're late.
Come in and grab chairs.
Oh, thank you.
There are handouts on the table, and let me make sure.
Oh, there you go. Excellent. Here's another one. Great.
You are
Michelle.
3 Michelles in this class?
Wow, no way!
You are? Greg, Christopher, and
Rennick?
Rennick?
Yes.
Good to meet you, Christopher. Have a handout. and have a handout. And fortunately, you're close to the beginning of the class, and any questions you have, you'll have me at the end of the class.
Right. And a comment, it's a little bit dark in here because we are also streaming this on the internet.
Oh, okay.
So we have to use our very best language, and I have to remind myself that. You never know what'll come out of a Sagittarian's mouth. All right, back to the concept. We're talking about success over the next 6 weeks, and we're looking at the astrological indicators of that. What we've covered so far is actually in your notes for the three of you. Was it Michelle, Greg, and Rennick?
Very good. Very good.
We'll see if that lasts through the end of it. So astrology, this star knowledge, star talk, actually developed alongside with civilization. Around the world, different systems of astrology basically developed individually, but also somewhat simultaneously. So here in the Near East, in Babylon and Sumer, we had astrology developing and impacting both the culture, the politics, and the religion of that region. In Egypt, astronomical observatories were developed, and in their architecture, they attempted to, in a sense, create on Earth a mirror of what went on in the heavens. The same in Mesoamerica. We have observational architecture. This is in the Andes. This was among the Quechua or Inca people. India and China are all regions where astrology developed somewhat independently. The closest areas of overlap here took place between, let me see if I can find my laser. The ancient Near East had an impact on Egypt as well as on India. So Indian astrology pretty much follows more ancient Babylonian astrology. And there's a lot of similarities there, as well as to medieval European astrology. So, talking about astrology, we also need to get on the same page in this class. And again, some of you who have been through more rudimentary classes with me, this information will be repetitive. But for the new students, it's important to understand what an astrological chart actually is. And let's see, Michelle number 2, I know you're a newbie, but Rennick, Greg, and Michelle number 3, I don't know what your background is. Any background in astrology?
Yes.
Okay, great. So some of this will be old hat to you then. All right, here's a picture of an astrological chart. And what it is a map of our consciousness at the time of birth. I like to refer to one's astrological chart as being one's spiritual DNA. Just as we have physical DNA in which is encoded the story of our life, we have in our charts a type of spiritual DNA that is encoded. And like physical DNA, it tends to indicate what our predispositions are and where we have tendencies in character, even much like physical DNA can show predispositions towards health factors. I find the astrological chart is also quite a phenomenal tool for that.
Very good.
Another way, Zane speaks of the astrological chart as being a blueprint of the soul. So, in a sense, you have the architectural model of your soul when you have your natal chart. The advantage of having the natal chart is it also indicates the areas of fortune or misfortune in one's life. I also like to call the natal chart the operating manual, which is set separately from the child. So not every parent gets the operating manual, and many of us don't get the operating manual until we've moved on in years. I feel fortunate enough that I had my chart done for the first time when I was 17, and other people encounter astrology at different points in their life. So, in our system of astrology, which is called Hermetic astrology, we always go back and refer to the astrological chart as being a map of character. And character equals destiny. So, where you may be feeling unsuccessful, the chart is valuable in terms of indicating to us areas of thought, feeling, or action that one can take in order to create a more successful outcome. This is what we're going to be concentrating on in the very last class of this series, the 6th class. It's going to be basically the process of how to rule your stars. Ultimately, change your character, you change your destiny. The chart indicates the character at the point of birth. We have experiences from birth forward, which come through environment, conditioning, etc., that impact us. And then, of course, we make choices continuously that work to shape our character. Now, the next thing I'm going to talk about is might fall into the realm of mythology. And every culture has its mythologies, and most cultures have what would be called creation myths. So I'm going to give all of you tonight the Hermetic creation myth, which might differ from the creation myth that you were raised with or other creation myths that have been studied. But it's sort of the creation myth that we use to explain to us the journey of the soul. And that's what tonight's class is about, the soul's journey into matter, which the astrological chart represents. But let me tell you first, since I didn't include this in my notes, here's tonight's class, Soul's Journey into Matter. We're going to talk about what an astrological chart actually is. Next week, and this will also be on the very bottom of your notes that I handed out to you on the last page, just in case you want to save your wrist
Appreciate that.
for more useful note-taking. The next week is going to be a really tough class. So those of you who stay on after next week are going to be my very best friends. But next week, what I do is getting you all on the same page of vocabulary that we use. And we are going to be looking at the planets and basically what aspects of vocation they govern, how each of the planets works to pull wealth or success into the chart. We'll also be taking a look at the signs and what the possible vocations they rule, and then the house positions and how each house in a chart has an ability to pull in wealth. This is going to be more list of information and rote material, but we're working to learn what Vicky described today as nuances. The nuances in the language of astrology that once you see the pattern and how it falls into place, the succeeding classes will make more sense. But next week, we're basically getting our astrological vocabulary that we'll use through the rest of the class. Then, in class number 3, we're going to look at an astrological chart. And those of you who just arrived before leaving tonight, provide Vicky with your birth data, the date, time, and place of birth. And in next week's class, we'll have your chart and astrodynes prepared. We are going to discuss astrodynes at the very end of next week's class. and then they will be brought into application in each of the succeeding classes. Especially when we look at the 4 factors of making money, what in a chart indicates that. The next class after that, on the 4th class, is discovering your life's work. And we're going to go through the process of vocational astrology and looking at a chart as it determines both vocation and avocation. Sometimes we're not always able to make a living from what we consider to be our life's work, and so we look at ways in which we can support ourselves while in our leisure time we're able to pursue the things that are really meaningful or dear to our heart. So that's going to be the discussion in the 4th class. Class number 5 I call Timing is Everything. So this is going to be looking at the influence of progressed aspects and their ability to either create what feels like unsuccessful periods in our life or successful periods. And then in the last class, once you basically know what's coming up in your chart, the last class is how to rule your stars. And this is, once you know what energies are impinging upon you at any given time, how you can move into specific thoughts, feelings, and actions to create constructive outcomes rather than what might be considered unfortunate outcomes. So, any questions about the structure of the class? Great. I wanted to start off with that just so you know what you're getting into, because tonight's class is a little more theoretical and abstract, but it sets the ground for what we'll be studying over the next few weeks. All right, on to the Hermetic myth, the cycle of necessity. It is the way in which, in our system of philosophy, we answer the following questions. Who am I? Where do I come from? And where am I going? These are the basic questions of life. And I'm going to read a long quote, which comes from the book Astrological Signatures by C.C. Zhang. But it's important. It helps to tell this story. Before it had a soul, the ego existed as a potentiality, as an eternal spark of the infinite, co-eternal with deity. But there came a time when it initiated specific activities. Hermetic tradition holds that this was due to the love vibrations of angelic parents occupying a plane interior to the spiritual. That is, the undifferentiated potential spark of deity was drawn to the celestial realm and there given birth by beings occupying that realm. At least it is certain that its potentialities were given a definite trend, otherwise there would have been no soul. Sounds a little bit like science fiction, but it's telling a key story here. This story, which is in this diagram, also in your notes, but much harder to see, is the story that there is a spark of the divine in each of us. You know, it's like atoms being passed off by God. They're attracted in this celestial world by these angelic parents. That gives birth, and it descends down through the astral worlds into various incarnations in the physical. Once reaching human form, we pass from human form into different levels of the astral plane, where we continue to develop experiences, moving on to spiritual levels. So this is called the cycle of necessity. Basically, it implies that if it's a necessity, each and every soul has to go through it. And it's basically, it could be described in 2 words, involution and evolution. So we're talking about a soul involving into matter and then evolving back to spirit.
Does he say anything about why it would do that?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
That's a very good question, young lady, and I think we'll talk about that next. Oh, all right. Oh, why does it do it? Okay, here's the answer to your question. In our tradition, the Brotherhood of Light, Brotherhood of Luxor tradition, the soul descends into matter in order to gain through experience. This is something you can't do up here. Experience comes through contact with form. Now, and it does so for two reasons, basically. The two polarities of learning that it's here to gain are love and wisdom, which could otherwise be known as compassion and knowledge. That through contact with the physical, we gain those two lessons, which then assist us in moving back towards spirit. Now, once incarnated into matter, the soul, they use the word monad. So we'll consider the soul monad, that almost like a cell, that soul's cell, which in every incarnation it gathers experiences around it. Basically, it moves through these succeeding states. In our tradition, the reincarnation that takes place is not repeated human rebirth, but a soul first enters into the mineral kingdom, evolves through various levels up into different forms of vegetable life, and then through different animal forms up to human, being at the pinnacle or the apex of the animal form. And it's in human form that we're able to gain these two skills, love and wisdom. We actually get them in little bits and pieces along the way, and we can see these in other life forms. So, what is love? I thought that would be a good question to ask, and we're going to use this to add to our vocabulary. Well, love, too, like success, is a noun. A profoundly tender, passionate affection for another person. I like that definition of love. Yeah. A feeling of warm, personal attachment or deep affection, as for a parent, child, or friend. Sexual passion or desire. Now, from the spiritual perspective, love or compassion is the feeling of recognition of our interconnectedness to the whole. That is our connectedness to all of life. So there's various forms of love, parent to child, between lovers, just erotic, passionate love. And then as we become spiritualized, this love becomes compassion or feeling our interconnectedness. So I like to call this connectedness to the whole is our holiness. The other thing we're here to learn is wisdom. Again, another noun. And it is the quality or state of being wise. Knowledge of what is true or right, coupled with just judgment as to action. Sagacity, discernment, or insight. Now, these are all big words. Well, it means to be a sage. Somebody, and not your common garden variety. This is, yeah, somebody.
Not my kind, but you.
Yeah, so we're not talking the Salvia family, but this is somebody who knows, basically. A sage is somebody who is an embodiment of wisdom, and I don't think that is me. I might be a know-it-all, but not a sage.
Prolonged history.
What's that?
Prolonged history.
Okay, another form of wisdom is scholarly knowledge. I might fit into that category, or learning the wisdom of the schools. Now, in Hermetic studies, wisdom or knowledge is science. And what this means is, to us, It's the observation of the natural world as it reveals the working of God. So our sanctuary, or our temple in which we worship, is the natural world. And we believe that the laws of nature, actually more than any book or scripture or other person's opinion, if you actually study how the natural world operates, you can see how the Creator operates. Because all of those laws, as above, so below, all of those laws of creation have taken form within the creation itself. Now, there is a difference between knowledge and information. That's important to know.
Well, we
Knowledge-
always say there's a difference between knowledge and wisdom. You can know a lot, but the wisdom, which I agree with that line,
Yes.
is coupled with the just judgment as to action. Is the difference that makes knowledge and wisdom.
We will change that. Yes, there is a difference between wisdom and knowledge. I think that's what I intended to say. And our ultimate goal is not to know, but when you really know something, you actually be that which you know. So back to our cycle of necessity. Here you can see we have the celestial realm. God's putting off his or her emanations. These angelic parents capture one of them like a fertilized ovum, send that soul. In the Hermetic tradition, there's a belief that there's actually, every soul does a division into male and female counterparts, though Plato actually gave a very different explanation of soulmates, as being any combination of male-male, female-female, male-female, though 19th century Hermeticism tends to just stick with male-female polarity.
I had a question on that.
Mm-hmm.
How far back does that go? How far back does that train of thought go in let's say, human history? That whole
In my
cycle of
studies,
necessity.
the first writings on it were Plato. Now, it could be the thought goes back further, but, human beings have only been writing for about 6,000 years. And Plato was writing about 2,500 years ago, which is, halfway into this history of writing. So I don't really have a way of knowing that, and so all I'm doing is I'm telling a myth here.
Well, the chain preludes Darwin, so he had some time in his life made that connection, even to come up with this.
Okay.
That's why I asked,
Yeah, well, yeah, no, this stuff goes back before Darwin, but Darwin came late on because Darwin was writing in, what, the 1880s?
Mhm.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying the connection between that spiritual realm to his physical realm.
And I do think there's a lot of connections there between this evolution and also Darwinian evolution. So, descending from the spiritual down into the astral, soul incarnates in the physical realm, as I mentioned, moving through different mineral forms, gaining experiences there, vegetable, animal, human, and then back through these realms on
So
that
they just
goal.
drop, once they come and split, it's a dead drop, right, to the physical?
Well,
There's
it's a
no
pretty,
knowledge
I think there's some gravitational pull going on there. That
Okay.
there may not be a lot of forms happening on the way down, but there certainly are on the way up.
Right, okay.
So there's more pictures to go with this. In each of these levels of experience, the soul develops new stages of consciousness, and if my memory was still working really well, I'd tell you what they are. I think in the mineral realm, no, Okay.
Yeah, I know sensitivity, I think, is.
Comes in the
veg-
plant form,
Oh,
in
the
vegetable form.
vegetable.
The mineral realm, the consciousness of the soul develops selectivity. And that is the ability, if you look at minerals, and crystals are an amazing form of this, as are minerals, those atoms and those molecules in that realm have the ability to attract to them others of the same nature. And around that are built these incredible crystalline forms. If any of you ever go down to Socorro, I strongly recommend visiting the museum on campus there at the School of Mining and Technology. The collection of minerals in that place are phenomenal. You can see how these atoms arrange themselves into these incredibly intelligent patterns. But that knowledge of selectivity, of like attracts like, is developed in that form. And then we go into sensitiveness and the instinct in the animal form, and up to human form, where we develop self-consciousness. And some people in human form can actually develop different levels of cosmic consciousness and higher forms, though many humans like to stay very close to their animal side. And all you have to do is watch news at 10, and you'll be convinced of that. So, involution, soul's descent from spirit to form. Evolution, it is the ascent back to spirit. And our ultimate goal in this process is to gain self-conscious immortality. And that is to be self-aware, but in a state of mystical union with the divine. One of my favorite poets, and again, those of you who have taken classes with me have to suffer through my reading from Rumi yet one more time. But
That's so painful.
it is. I died as a mineral and became a plant. I died as a plant and rose to animal. I died as an animal and I was man. Why should I fear? When was I less by dying? Yet once more I shall die as man, to soar with angels blessed. But even from angelhood I must pass on. All except God doth perish. When I have sacrificed my angel soul, I shall become what no mind e'er conceived. Oh, let me not exist, for non-existence proclaims in organ tones, to him we shall return. This is by Jalaluddin Rumi, and this is 13th century, so Sufi poet. All right, here's another pictorial form. Again, in Western tradition, especially out of the Judeo-Christian tradition, comes the story of Jacob's ladder. This one is a wonderful illustration by the English mystic and poet William Blake. But here, in Jacob's dream, where he saw this ladder, he saw angels ascending and descending this spiral ladder into heaven. Now, again, tied in with love and wisdom, the other thing we get through each successive form in our evolution is ability. Some of us around here have greater skills than we had yesterday because we've been forced to, work with or encounter new technology or techniques or process or procedure or efforts towards diplomacy. So there's always some degree of growth that's taking place. Now, Hermeticism tells us that greater ability is essential for fulfilling our role in God's great plan. So in about 3 more weeks, we're going to be talking about that, how the chart represents not only career success, but what our cosmic work might be, what each soul has been called forth to do in this world. Here's another Jacob's ladder, which I thought ran so wonderfully parallel to that illustration of Blake's. Anyone recognize that? Yeah, that's our double helix there. So, this thing called life, in Hermeticism, the only way we differentiate it is by degree. So from mineral up to human, to us all of it is life. And that the degree of life really is only separated by the degree of experience that soul has gone through. So I like that image. Oh, another one. I like to teach with pictures. Sometimes they tell us more. Here's another quote. Fortunately, it's in your handouts. Because there is no conceivable way by which the soul can acquire love and wisdom except through varied experiences in form, the cycle through which the soul passes from spirit to matter and from matter back to spirit, living in countless forms in each of these three realms, is called by initiates the cycle of necessity. That is, this cycle of experiences in various forms is a necessity if the soul is to acquire the love and wisdom which alone make possible self-conscious immortality. More quotes. Actually, I've got a run of quotes here, so bear with me. Now, let us trace the soul in its cycle of necessity. It is first differentiated in the highest state of the spiritual realm. It then possesses neither consciousness nor feeling, but is supplied by the ego with energy. And by the ego is given a specific trend. This specific trend is determined by the love vibrations of its angelic parents that brought about the ego's differentiation. That is, such ego with its two souls is a part of universal society, differing from all other egos. In a universal society, as in all meritorious organizations, there is a division of labor. Nature moves towards specialization, and each specialized part performing a definite function. Therefore, the soul impelled on its cyclic journey is given that trend which offers it the opportunity to develop such attributes as it requires if it is ultimately to fill its proper sphere as a useful member in the cosmos. So, there's a couple words here which we use in our studies that are sometimes a little bit different than used elsewhere. Ego to us represents that original spark, that little piece of God that floated off and inseminated the angelic parents, so that each of us carries that with us. Now, in Western psychology, ego is used in a somewhat different way. And when we talk of somebody as being egoistic or egotistical, we usually consider them to be full of themselves. But for us, the ego is that initial sort of cell or molecule or atom around which all of these other accumulated experiences develop that become what we call our soul. Okay, this is going to be the last in the run of lengthy quotes, I believe. Well, just about. All right, just to finish telling you this story, tonight's class is about storytelling. Likewise, back of all expressions of individual consciousness and form, there is potentiality. This potentiality, this energy that expresses itself through consciousness and form, finally expressing through the human form as the mind of man, was not derived from nothing. It is a potentiality as eternal as the potentiality behind the universe. For while energies express in different forms, one of the most stable natural laws is that of conservation of energy. the law that there is no more and no less energy in the universe today than there was in the infinitely distant past, or than there will be in the infinitely distant future. The I, therefore, that does not change, the I that we feel existed farther back than we can remember, and that which we can hardly imagine as not existing in the future, is the potentiality which activates our existence. It is usually referred to as the ego. So this big bang that sent off all of these sparks of life across the universe, one of them becoming that thing which we identify as us, the I am. That's the ego in our tradition. Now, I'm going to go to one of my other favorite authors to describe this story, and that is Joseph Campbell, the great mythographer. So, his comes from The Hero with 1,000 Faces, one of his earliest books, and just a phenomenal way of looking at life. A hero ventures forth from the world of common day into a region of supernatural wonder. Fabulous forces are there encountered, and a decisive victory is won. The hero comes back from this mysterious adventure with the power to bestow boons on his fellow man. So, for us, the cycle of necessity it encapsulates the hero's journey, this descent into matter and journey back to spirit, and everything that happens in between that falls in the realm of mythology is this journey, each of us being the hero in our own journey. And this process, this hero's journey, or this cycle of necessity, we believe was also symbolized in ancient cultures in the ritual of initiation. Okay, well, we came to an astrology class, so let me talk about this a little bit more. Having gone through our storytelling, and also Joseph Campbell said that mythology is the other guy's religion. So I always like that explanation. This is what our astrological chart is. It is basically the sum total of all of these experiences we've had. And it is up to that moment of birth. So the chart of birth represents our potentiality in this form, as it is a map of accumulated experience.
Of accumulated experiences from previous
forms, experience in form, mineral,
So
vegetable,
mineral,
animal,
alright,
on up, and countless forms. You could have been a lichen, for all I know.
Right.
I probably was, because I love the colors that lichens come in. So. And I love to cooperate, lichens being a cooperative culture of, I think, bacteria and fungus.
And so the reincarnations just occur as the spirit grows. You could be a mineral 18 times.
You
or
could.
You could be 2.
And you might go from, quartz to gold, or along any line,
But
depending on
those-
what qualities you were supposed to learn.
Right,
in the
big old
process.
diamond ring on some girl's finger.
You could have done that.
So those previous lives are also represented in our birth chart. Is what you're saying.
In a sense,
Okay.
but by the strengths in the chart, which we'll talk about next week and the week following. Each chart shows a pattern, and it shows a family to which it belongs, and therefore it gives us key as to what our soul's lessons have been, what's been accumulated as experience, and how that impacts us in this form. Because each of you will realize that you've had repetitive patterns of experience in your life. And the ones you've had are probably different than yours, or mine, or Ricky's, or anyone here. We may all have experiences with mating and shelter and having to care for other life forms and finding food. There are certain things that are universal. But other than that, each one of us has life things that we're working out, and always surprised when they show up again.
I'll back at that.
I thought I worked that one out.
Interesting.
Oh, darn, another quote. As a result of the experiences before human birth, each person has groups of thought cells organized in his astral body that relate to all the fundamental desires. He is born at such a time that the planets in the sky accurately map not only the degree of activity of each such group of thought cells and the department of life experiences with which form them, but also their relationship to other thought cells and whether their desires are harmonious or discordant. That is, the birth chart maps the result of all the experiences before human birth as these have formed thought cells within the soul. So one can't necessarily look at the chart and say that you were a howler monkey in your past life. But if you had a dominant discordant Mercury, there might be a good chance. Who knows? Now, this actually goes on, and then I swear will be towards the end of the very long quotes. The events which are attracted after birth correspond in their characteristics to the planetary nature of the thought cells and their harmony or discord. The more active thought cells, those mapped by more prominent planets, attract more important events. And these events are characteristic of them. The more active thought cells also influence the thoughts and the tendency to behavior. That is, the environment both in childhood and in later life which tends to condition the individual's attitude towards different departments of his life is influenced by the factors mapped in the chart of birth. And we're almost to an end. Furthermore, because certain groups of thought cells are more active and certain groups are more harmonious in one child's astral body than in another, one child will react to a set of circumstances quite differently than will another child, even though both have grown up in the same home and within the same general environment. Have any of you ever met brothers and sisters that you might think came from completely different planets? Someone's smirking over here, and I've actually met her sister, but I won't use her name aloud. Yes, it is known to happen. You know, in my family, there's great similarity. It's just a matter of who's more eccentric than the next. And we've all decided it's my youngest brother. So, but other than that, you can actually tell that there's some similarity there. But in some families, it is just such a mystery. You know, were the babies switched at the hospital or what happened? So are you getting a sense of what an astrological chart is, at least from this philosophical background? Because this is, we're setting the stage here in terms of everything we're going to study over the next few weeks. How does this impact our successes or failures? And where does it come from?
The thought cells that are referred to in this quote, he's associating those with like planetary influences. Did that quote say that and I just missed it?
No, it didn't say that. He
Is
assumed
that
that
how
you knew what he
thought
was
cells-
talking about.
Is that how thought cells relate to a chart?
Right, and next week we're going to talk about each of the thought cells. For example, the sun rules power, and the moon domesticity, and Mercury intellect, and Venus social, and Mars aggressive. These are all thought cells within the soul, and we use the symbol of the planets to represent these experiences accumulated in the soul. And that's actually what he's talking about. And the stronger that planet's influence is in your chart, then the greater those experiences have been built into the soul or the subconscious organism of that individual due to their incarnations in different form. Is everyone following, or am I just babbling along. Okay,
Yeah.
good. Want to make sure you actually understand this process.
This question might be for next week, and maybe
Yes,
you
sir.
already said that we've got a lot of stuff happening here.
How unusual in my class.
The question I have, and it's a stupid question, but I'll ask it anyway, is when we come into incarnation, I mean, my sense is that, you know, there are conditions, unseen and seen, that mirror. It's like a magnetic or a reflective, attractive process. So those configurations of planetary energies are also a reflection of what we're coming in with innately in our beings. Is that right?
Absolutely,
Right,
it's
okay.
that law of correspondences,
Okay.
or I think Jung refers to it as a type of coincidence.
The synchronicity.
A synchronicity, yes, between what's mirrored in the heavens and what's mirrored in this holograph of the being that's being born. And you'll see that I'm pulling quotes from several different books. And I don't know if I did it in this class or not, since I've been spending the last month and a half preparing for this, and sometimes forget what I've done. There's a great chapter in the first book, which is called Laws of Occultism, and this is the Doctrine of Nativities. And it's just such a wonderful story that sort of describes, again, in this process of why one brother or sister is so different. Not only does the astrological chart map that, but the Brotherhood of Light teachings also believed that it was the energies between parents in their lovemaking at the time of conception has a profound influence over the type of soul that is born. And in many traditions, there's this platitude or this idea that we choose our parents. Well, it's not really like we are today as, you know, discerning adults sitting up here on a cloud and going, yeah, I like the way he looks, but, you know, she's a little cranky, that sort of thing. We don't choose it in that way. It's chosen through the law of affinity. Basically, like attracts like. And this is why I've counseled so many parents who have come to me who have been adoptive parents. And quite often, what is being adopted are children out of situations of forced affection, basically born out of rape. And it's amazing the kind of troubles that are attracted to that. I'm not saying all, and I'm not necessarily saying there's some statistical analysis here, but certainly in you know, what facet of my work that I've done with parents, it's amazing, you know, time after time. And again, children born to parents who are, you know, absolutely in love at the time of conception. It's oftentimes reflected in the chart, what could be harmonious angles between the sun and moon or Venus and Mars, and in the temperament of the individual born.
Just one point about that, like attracts like. I'm not sure about whether I agree entirely or whether I'm understanding it in the same way, but sometimes there seems to be like a kind of an attraction to a parent that will actually bring out those like lessons. Their energy may be really unlike, but in some other bigger way, maybe it's all part of a whole. Do you know what I mean?
Right, and again, it may be like in terms of similarity, the fruit doesn't fall far from the tree, or it may be because, let's say you have a distant father, or there's some other experience that takes place where that soul is getting the training that it needs in its next stage of evolution. So we sort of assume that there is some kind of divine awareness going on there that makes all of those selections.
So in a more subtle way, there is a similarity by the nature of the interaction, even though on the surface value it may not look.
Correct.
Okay.
Well stated. So, what is an astrological chart? again, I will hammer this into all of you who've been in class with me before. And this is the inner plane to outer plane relationship. It's in your notes. There's about 5 of you in the room who've heard this before, but bear with me. Because I'm of the age and come from the background where repetitive learning is how we actually got things over time. All right, human beings live in 2 environments. In fact, all living beings live in 2 environments. We have an inner plane, which is commonly referred to in metaphysics as the astral, and we have an outer plane, which we will refer to as the physical, and most of us are really aware of that because that's the plane in which we have our form. So, what does that look like? They are separated. These 2 realms are separated by what is called the etheric boundary line. And I failed to correct that again, unless somehow unconsciously I'm correct and Einstein's wrong.
Let's guess.
Yeah, well, it actually is 186,172 miles per second. But I think time has sped up somehow, and it's all moving faster. But this is what, essentially, minus 10 miles a second.
Speed of light.
Speed of light, yeah. And that's what separates the astral realm from the physical realm, is that particular frequency.
Physical boundary.
It is. It is the boundary line. So here is your soul up there operating in the astral realm. This is where all of that stuff that we consider unconscious, and science is all constantly trying to study the mind, and of course looking for it in the brain, which is really just a connecting point. You know, the mind, it's like that thing I plug into my computer, the jump drive. The mind interfaces with the body through the brain, but that's just the plug-in point, basically. All right, and this is your body.
You've met her before, haven't you?
Yeah, I think you have. I do have a man somewhere in all of this. Okay, so what's going on? There is this connecting point between the soul and the physical body. In Hermeticism, we work with this thing as above, so below. Now, dang, this is moving fast. The inner, or the astral plane, interpenetrates the physical, and it has a molding effect over the physical. This is functioning at a frequency that moves above the speed of light. Things happen on the inner plane before filtering their way down to the slower moving physical substance. This is how astrology works. This is how you can look at a chart and tell someone what's going to happen at some point in their future. The outer plane, or the physical plane, is this dense, slow-moving substance that vibrates at a frequency below the speed of light. The events which happen here happen first on the inner plane. Back to the law of attraction, or the law of affinity. Basically, I'm using the brain here, but it's just, again, it's the interface of the subconscious to the conscious realm. And what goes on here, like attracts like, basically. What goes on in our consciousness determines the type of events and experiences that we bring into our lives. We went back earlier, and Vicky pointed out, what are these thought cells he's talking about? Whether it's aggressive Mars or individualistic Uranus or utopian Neptune, these are all thoughts within our soul that are functioning, and they function in consciousness, and they draw events and experiences into our lives which actually mirror those states of consciousness. This is the way we're able to interpret an astrological chart. So,
Could it also mirror our unconscious?
yes, because we're not always aware of the racket that we're running. You know, there are programs, much like on your computer, that run in the background. You know, I have security programs running that I'm not always aware that they're running, except, why is my computer moving so slowly? And I'll do a Control-Alt-Delete and see that there's something in there that's taking up, you know, all that RAM space. And, you know, I don't always do that as well with my conscious mind, but I think that might be a good habit. So,
I just want to add to that, because my understanding of the unconscious is that it also contains a lot of really good gold material, you know. So at some level you might be running something really, you know, profoundly, I don't know what, wonderful, but it's
I assume that I am.
Well, exactly. You are. You're living proof of it.
I don't know.
And I assume you are
But
too.
I wanted to add that because you were talking about the block part, which most of us are familiar with.
Right, but now we'll use some pictures.
Yeah.
Because they're always good for, the subconscious mind actually speaks to us through symbols and through feelings. So that's why I use a lot of pictures in class, because, you know, old Chinese saying, picture worth 1,000 words. So, what do we attract into our lives? You know, we know that there are people that attract in, you know, wealth, health, and companionship. There are also persons that attract in poverty, injury, and or solitude. So we're all attracting different experiences. The chart is helpful in identifying what those thoughts are that are operating. And then, of course, there are certain things, like in this image, this was societal. This was a wave of activity going on, and it seems like it's happening again. So, this comes from Occultism Applied in a chapter called Living the Constructive Life. Throughout nature, we find one principle manifesting itself under two modes of motion: construction and destruction. Practically every emotional state, every thought, and every action lend their energies as adding to or detracting from our success in life. After all, life is not just a few important decisions and actions. It is the sum of countless moods, perceptions, conceptions, and movements, only a few of which are noteworthy, but all of which contribute their little or their much to the sum total of attainment. Every minute of our lives, we are contributing to or detracting from our ultimate success. A neutral ground is difficult to discover. At all times, to a greater or lesser degree, our energies are flowing in channels that are destructive or in channels that are constructive. Only when the sum total of constructive energies is far in excess of the sum total of destructive energies is there satisfactory accomplishment. Read that again this week in your notes, because it's going to be an important concept that comes up as we start to analyze charts over the next few weeks. So, 4 factors which contribute to success. I am one of those astrologers that does not believe that astrology explains everything. I think it gives us a really big part of the picture, but there are other things that we have to go to get a whole picture. So, heredity and ancestry is part of the picture. Your DNA is part of what contributes to this whole picture of success, or what appears not to be success. Your environment in which you live. You will have different experiences if you live in an igloo above the Arctic Circle than if you grow up in Manhattan, or in the tropics, or in any of the countless cultures and environments. If you grow up in, you know, communist China, or in London, where there are greater freedoms of expression. So Your environment, it's the amazing fluke of nature that I fascinate upon weekly, is how one just happens to be born somewhere and how that impacts what we might call their fate or their destiny. The astrological chart is one of these 4 factors that we look at. Why? It's our spiritual DNA, and it gives us a lot of information. And lastly, the other thing that determines your destiny is really the purpose to which you direct your will. And this is something that we actually have power over all the time in the present moment. We are constantly and continuously making choices. Hermetic studies are primarily focused around this facet of the process. All of the other contributes to it. The study of the astrological chart is so important to us to know the mission of our soul, but ultimately our process is always about to what purpose do we direct our will. All right. All of life expresses as a trinity of urges, and Michelle, number 2, I think you're the only person here who's not familiar with astrological symbols. You're number 1. You're
No,
one.
you're referring to me as Michelle number 2, but I,
Oh, no. You're 1, 2, 3.
Never mind.
Okay.
Only because of location.
Okay.
Next week,
I thought
I'll
I
have
was
to read
Maybe
it.
2.
2 because I arrived, so.
You know what, that would have been another way to measure it.
But
But then I would have had to remember chronology as opposed to position, so.
Christopher, can you raise that a little bit, because I pulled it down so far, it's cutting off the, there, thank you.
Does everyone like that?
Much better.
Okay.
Trying to figure out.
All right. 3 urges basically express in every form of life. It's easier to see this in plants and animals than it is in minerals, which move at an almost imperceptible speed to our human eye. It's harder for us to see them deriving their nutrition and their reproduction, but they do. What? Minerals draw in elements from around them, and they split off and they grow, additional forms around them. So that is taking place. But we see here the symbol for the sun. That corresponds to the drive for significance. That also represents that dot within the circle is the germ or the spark of deity within each of us. So the sun represents that ego, that imperishable part of the self, and it is the thing that motivates every life form to feel alive, to be significant in some way. Now, that has 2 parallel urges, which are considered nutrition and reproduction. And this isn't specifically saying, but I do believe that Mars and the Moon are involved in nutrition. The way I arrived at that is by watching nature films. We live in a savage world. Every life form is eating every other life form. And that's the way it is. In order to survive, in order for any one life form to survive, it has to devour another life form. Those of us in civilized society that shop at supermarkets where everything's neatly packaged, we don't quite have that experience of taking another's life. Unless you belong to a local culture where you may be doing your matanzas in the fall and letting the blood out of animals and then butchering their parts, or going hunting with a bow and arrow. there are other people that live closer to the life forms that they feed upon, but we've really done a good job at distancing ourselves from that. I may grow a few herbs and vegetables and, pluck them for my nutrition. But I ain't making my own tofu, I'll tell you that. So, Mars is involved in nutrition, I have determined. And Mars and Venus are both involved in reproduction. Because even that process, if you watch it among some humans and or most of the animal kingdom, it's not always done willfully or willingly, I should say. So, the ego is life itself, the I am force. Nutrition, significance is that sense of feeling alive. And one of the mantras I use with myself every day is, while alive, act alive. Whatever I'm tempted not to. Nutrition is basically how you stay alive. Unless you feed yourself, you will not stay alive. And with many elders, one of the processes we see when they're ready to pass on is they stop eating. Reproduction is continuing life. Not all of us do that. And so, but what it is it has been so created in the organism to want to pass its DNA on to future generations. Life wants to continue itself. Persons who do not have offspring oftentimes do it through creative works of some kind, whether it's great works of literature, artworks, or writing or other things by which they live on after their body has dissolved. Legacies live on, yes. This urge to fill in its ego's blueprint manifests in all life forms as the struggle to survive and be something. That is, the desire for significance is the oldest of all impulses with which the soul is endowed. And, as determined experimentally through laboratory work, it is the strongest of all desires. It is the one which, so long as life lasts, the soul will not relinquish. The thought elements built into the astral body by experiences that give additional energy to this most deep-seated of all tendencies are called the power elements. Their most energetic thought structure in the astral body is mapped in the birth chart by the position of the sun. These power elements, in their expression, give rise to two primeval desires of opposite polarity, just as the ego evolves a positive and a negative soul. The two primeval desires are not thought elements, but the still more primitive factors of which all thought elements are built. In our physical universe, positive and negative charges as protons, I've left something out here, are the building blocks of which all the elements of matter are composed. And in similar manner, all true thought elements are composed of reproductive desires and nutritive desires in some proportion. That is, the elements belonging to 10 distinct families of which the psychoplasm in the thought cells is composed are themselves built up of still simpler tendencies called reproductive desires and nutritive desires. We're almost to the end of this quote. Next to the desire for significance, the two strongest are the positive desire to attain that significance through expression outside the self, and the negative desire to attain that significance through adding something to the self. The positive reproductive desire manifests as the tendency to perpetuate the race, or in the desire to perform some creative work, both of which give some satisfaction to the desire for significance. The negative nutritive desires give rise to all those activities having for their end self-preservation, which in turn gives opportunity for significance. We talked about survival earlier. If you've survived this far, you've been a success. Believe me, it's true.
You have significance.
You do.
You are here.
Okay. I'm hoping I'm not trying to cover more tonight than we can, but we've got another 40 minutes. So, I'm going to speed through the next. Pleasure and pain. These are important things, and they come up when we study a chart. You may wonder what I'm talking about, but we call it fortune and misfortune, harmony and discord. So these are the only means by which a soul can be educated to accomplish anything. For any place we observe any form of life, we find it undergoing education at the hands of pleasure and pain. Pleasure and pain, in some degree, are common to all forms of life on all planes. And everywhere we observe their effect, we find that they conduce to education. So, what does that mean? Life is a schooling process. Have any of you ever made mistakes?
Just
Maybe one.
Yeah, I made one once too. Anyways, pain is the teacher. Pleasure is the reward. That is how nature works. And we can find these lessons built into our charts of birth. All right, pain is equal to discord in an astrological chart. If we look for a definition, it is physical suffering or distress, a distressing sensation in a particular part of the body, mental or emotional suffering or torment. Pain informs the organism that it is not successful in adapting to its environment. That is the purpose of pain. That is how pain is the teacher. What happens when you sit on a tack? Yeah.
you stand up.
You stand up, you pull it out of your ass, and you sit somewhere more comfortable. So there's something being learned in the process, or you learn to look before you sit down. There's any numbers of ways that we learn from our painful experiences. What happens in most organisms is this fight or flight response. And pain for most of us, and I certainly was thinking of this yesterday while I was visiting my massage therapist, is that it creates a state of dynamic tension. That's what pain does. Now, where this is important is when faced with their potential destruction, all life forms must learn how to avoid or overcome the conditions that threaten them. This is success. There is a downside to all of this, and that is prolonged periods of pain or struggle create stress and can impact our mental and physical health. Oh my God, I forgot what that means. Post-traumatic stress syndrome is one of such disorders that is the result of prolonged exposure to painful stimuli. I must have it.
Can I add?
You can add, since you've come from a...
PTSD background.
Yes.
Obviously, I mean, we're pretty well, I imagine we all know this anyway, but it's not necessarily prolonged exposure, but it's sometimes the amount of painful stimuli. So
Right, it's the difference between acute and chronic, in a sense. One can have one single experience of great magnitude, or one can have repeated experiences of lesser intensity.
It's like it just can't be integrated in whether it be continual or one big burst. Yeah. So that's, I think, where the dysfunction comes in. That it, if you can't process it, even if you're not aware that you can't process it, it appears years later, which is a problem because you think you want to process it when it comes up, but if you don't know what to process. Yeah.
So there you have the downside of pain. Quite often it is the great teacher, and sometimes it is the thing that just ends up short-circuiting our desire to live. But we've all met people who have told us, that pain has sometimes moved us into action. This is happening for a reason. My illness was my wake-up call. I was talking with a client some months ago, maybe a year ago. And she used the word, "Oh, you mean another AFGO?" I said, "AFGO? What's that?" It's an acronym for another effing growth opportunity. So I'm now calling them AFGOs. Well, how is this represented in a chart? Oh, we're actually doing astrology now. All right. In an astrological chart, you have conditioning energy that is represented there. And conditioning energy comes in 3 types. There is harmonious, neutral, and discordant energy. And much like we were talking about experiences that can lead to post-traumatic stress disorder, we're just talking about life experiences now. Sometimes you can have repeated weak influences, or you can have singular powerful influences. And it's the same with harmony or discord. And even with neutral energy, which is unconditioned, but just adds power to a chart. Those of you familiar with astrology will recognize as harmonious aspects the trine, which is 120 degrees, or 4 signs apart, the sextile, which is 60 degrees, or 2 signs apart, and the semi-sextile, which is 30 degrees, or 1 sign apart. Neutral aspects are the conjunction, which is 0 degrees, the inconjunction 150 degrees, and the parallel, or contra-parallel, which is 0 degrees, but it's measured by declination, where a planet falls north and south of the equator. The discordant energies are quite generous, so life is a teacher, I've decided, because we have 180 degree aspects, or oppositions. We have 90 degree aspects when planets are 3 signs apart. These are squares. The sesqui square, which is 135 degrees, and the semi-square, or a square and a half, and a semi-square, which is half a square, or 45 degrees. These add conditioning energy in the chart. And these are what we look at as being the painful and or pleasurable stimuli, astrologically. And, oh, there's your discord. Yeah, that's the painful teacher. Boing, it's a bullseye. So, this is in your notes in a really small form that if you pull out a magnifying glass, you will be able to read it.
That's fun.
If not, I will repeat it over the next 6 weeks. You can be almost guaranteed. All right, pleasure. This is another thing. Pleasure is equivalent in a chart to what we call harmony. The definition, the state or feeling of being pleased. Enjoyment or satisfaction derived from what is to one's liking. Gratification, delight. Pleasure informs the organism. I'm starting to slur, I'm so tired. The organism. It's water in my bottle over here, it's not vodka. That it is being successful. See that word, success? This is important because that's what the class is about for the next few weeks. In other words, pleasure indicates that our needs for significance, food, shelter, or reproduction are being fulfilled. Do any of you have cats or dogs? I'm hoping none of you have tigers at home. Well, what happens to animals when they get pleasure?
They purr.
And they go into a state of relaxation. Yeah. I could make my tense little chihuahua turn into a pool of blubber. Yeah, they do relax. All right, back to the PTSD. The thing is, to remain healthy, we actually need alternating periods of dynamic tension followed by periods of relaxation.
You could call that work.
I was gonna say, is that like the 40-hour work?
Yeah, work, and then how come we only get 2 days off?
Yeah. What is that about?
I don't know,
Yeah,
it's very,
yeah, I'm thinking there's something wrong with this equation. But
It's they're all the, you know, there's more discord there, you know.
oh, that's right, there were more
This is
discordant
why.
aspects. Got to keep that in mind. And I've already discussed this. These are the harmonious aspects. That's why we only get 2 days of
Recreation.
weekend and occasionally a 3-day holiday. Oh, and then Buddha had to go and say,
What?
life is suffering. So, in case you weren't feeling cheery when you arrived in class, a good thing to remind yourself is you're actually not the only form of life to suffer. Yeah. So, you're all here in class, you're all successful. You have survived your life thus far, and I'm sure all of you have had moments of pleasure punctuated by agonizing moments, and everything else in between. All right, now our emotional reactions to experiences come through our interaction with the environment. We talked about this. Pleasure tells us we're being successful. Pain tells us we're being unsuccessful. What happens when we're in pain? If we're in a healthy state, we move to correct it, because we're always looking to find some type of equilibrium again. That's part of that thing of surviving this long. Back to the birth chart. The birth chart planets and their relative harmony and discord represent the evolutionary experiences in form, mineral to animal, with each of the 10 distinct types of expression: power, domesticity, intellect, social, aggressive, religious, safety, individualistic, utopian, and universal welfare are each of the 10 distinct types of expression. We're going to be looking next week at astrodynes, which is a way of measuring astrological energy in the chart. I don't want to go into it too much tonight because I have even more things I want to cover. But the astrodynes are the best way to find the conditioning energy in your chart and then be able to transform those energies which are conditioned with pain. Barb's waving at me. Is there a question, a comment?
A comment from Renee. Likes attract, likes attract likes. I would like to add that I think quite often like attracts what it needs to learn something important.
Great, and I think that's somewhat paraphrasing what Summers said earlier, that yes, sometimes we attract the exact experience that mirrors our states of consciousness. Sometimes the soul attracts experiences that mirror what the next stage in its schooling might be. Oh, accomplishment. What's that? Let me see if I can find this. It's another Zane quote. I just got ahead of myself here. Forgot to turn my notes. Any worthwhile accomplishment, whether of man, of animal, or of plant, is the result of overcoming great obstacles. If there were no difficulties to be surmounted, it would be an easy thing to do, and not a worthwhile accomplishment. If you will notice the lives of men, you will find that only those who have had much practice in overcoming difficulties, thus getting a thorough training, ever rise to a point of superior accomplishment. Superior accomplishment means overcoming obstacles. Man and other forms of life only learn to surmount difficulties through encounters with them. So here we go back to that thing, growing in love and wisdom. Well, we get it through this schooling process. So in this class, we're going to talk about success, and society honors people who are exceptional in some way. We'll be looking at charts over the next few weeks to see how that's represented. This may not be the most shining example, but in some certain circles, this actually means a lot. I have known beauty pageant princesses, and the process, although outside my realm of understanding, was extremely meaningful to them.
And very challenging.
And challenging, exactly.
Right.
Very challenging. So, what do we reward? Talent, we reward beauty, we reward ability, accomplishment. All right, honors usually mean somebody has achieved something. And this could be rank, public esteem, fame, or glory. So our charts indicate success both in the realm of money, and we're also going to be looking at it from the realm of glory. Some people have fame and no fortune. There are other people that will have fortune and never have fame. So the astrological chart can actually indicate this to us. As I've always said, I can't eat awards. You know, the various times that I've been given trophies, plaques, and ribbons, I've never been able to boil them up into, you know, a nice soup of any kind. Summa cum laude, you know, with great honor or with great distinction. So, sports world, World Cup, Heisman Trophy, Wimbledon Trophy. These are all different ways where people who have really, have any of these sports stars just fallen into it to where it's so easy? What do? They practice, practice, practice. Many of them encounter injuries, have to undergo surgeries. There's a lot that takes place in the process. And every 4 years, the Olympic Committee confers gold, silver, and bronze upon those persons who are considered to be the world's greatest athletes. And these, of course, are persons who have trained and trained and trained and constantly have competed either against others or against their own personal best to achieve these goals. Okay, 4-H Club. I went a month ago to see all the chickens and pigs and the goats at the 4-H at the state fairgrounds. It was quite marvelous, and you have these young kids working their hardest to raise these, you know, amazing animals. So, I think next week, does state fair start this weekend? You know, go and look at people's jam.
That's lovely.
You know, it is, especially if there's testings going on. I love to see the pumpkins. You know, who grows the biggest pumpkin? And I always ponder, you know, how did they get that in there, into the glass cases? You know, state fair's great because it's a place where people are given awards. There are Pulitzer Prizes in literature and journalism. I have friends who have received Academy Awards and Emmys for the efforts they've done in their fields. And I've known persons who were nominated, but I don't know anyone personally who got that award. But there are all levels of honor in life that can be seen within the chart. Which begs the question, is success significance or is it money? And it really depends on what the soul needs.
Are you, I mean, my understanding also of success, which is not just in the world recognition, it could be on a more subtle interior level. But is the way of reading that the same?
It
in the
is.
chart? Okay.
I'm just using external symbols right now because for many, they're more powerful symbols. Of course, success is back to pleasure or pain. Pleasure indicates what? The organism has been successful. Pain indicates what? The organism is being unsuccessful. So if you're feeling great pleasure with your life, you're being successful. And it doesn't require that you have great gobs of money, nor that you have any ribbons on your wall. You don't need that. But they are things that we use externally, and they are things that people who use the tool of astrology often are asked to look for. So, there is the self-esteem of others, but there is also what is even more important than these external symbols is internal self-esteem. So, next week we're going to start our talk about this, money, which is a medium of exchange. Humans, for at least 100,000 years, have been trading. Money merely became a way to standardize that process. In case your shekel of barley was, not equivalent to my 2 chickens. So, and that unit has been in use for 3,000 years. Now, we rarely talk about shekels anymore. I think that went out with, Commedia dell'arte. But I'm going to move through this quickly because we're going to talk about it again. Money, which is going to be one of our topics of measurement of success and what we look for in a chart. Part of the purpose of designing this class is it is a time right now, much like in the Great Depression, where people are not feeling as successful as they have in the past. So we're looking for the ways to super-generate that. All right, our word money actually comes from the temple of Julia Moneta in Rome. And that is where they minted their coins. And if you speak any of the Latin languages, you'll see moneta in the Latin terms for money. All right, the concept that I want to get to, though, is we refer to money as currency. Why is that? It moves in currents. So we want to, by understanding our own charts over the next few weeks, is figure out how we can get those currents moving.
Keep that stuff flowing.
Yes, and we're working with the concept that money is a symbol for energy. Capture, storage, release of energy. We capture energy in the process of making money. Money is truly just a symbol, especially now that it's paper and it's not necessarily backed. When I was a child, you could still get bills that were legal tender for silver if you were to take it to the mint or to the Federal Reserve. You could actually get the value of that dollar in silver. Well, they discontinued that quite early on in my life, but I think I still have one of those bills that I've held on to because the concept was so pleasing to me that money might actually be backed up by something of value. But it's a symbol. Storage of energy, we do that when we save money, and we release energy when we spend money. So we're going to be looking at money over the next few weeks really as just units of energy. And there are symbols on some of our money which help to remind us that our good comes from God. Here are some words that I want for you to think about as I read them aloud. affluence, benevolence, bounty, excess, generosity, goodwill, largesse, munificent, don't use that one much anymore, opulence, plenty, prosperity, riches, success, wealth. How does that make you feel? Those nice feelings?
I want some of all.
Yeah, I'd like a combo plate, please. All right. All of these words, we're going back to astrology here, are associated with the planet Jupiter. So we're working with symbols here in the process of astrology. So words can become very useful to us. Poverty. Now here are a whole new set of words. I want you all to sit and feel these words. Adversity, confinement, dearth, deficiency, destitution, financial ruin, hardship, insolvency, lack, limitations, loss, poverty, privation, restrictions, scarcity, shortfall, want. How are you feeling right about now?
Excellent.
Yeah, I should have done this first. Well, these are all thoughts that correspond to the planet Saturn in astrology. So the first concept I wanted to get across in tonight's class is the two business planets. Now, Saturn also has a more positive side, which we'll explore next week. But there are two concepts of plenty and deficiency, which are represented astrologically in the planets Jupiter and Saturn. By looking at your chart, noting their position, their relative strength and or harmony and discord can be very helpful in, at a glance, understanding where you have flow in your life, where things come in with a certain amount of ease, and where you have restrictions or confinement. I'm going to skip through this quickly because we have 10 minutes left and I actually want to go, but not without touching on this concept. And look, I'm only a few pages away. I want to go to the next few things, which means we may go 5 minutes over, and I hope you'll all bear with me patiently because I know some of you are tired from working all day. What I find so curious is we measure wealth not so much by how much we earn, but how much of what we earn we're able to hold on to. So here's a real key as to how Saturn is one of the measurements of wealth in a chart, because it is that process of storage. All right, I've included the word flow up here because what I've been meditating on in the last 6 weeks is the concept of flow. And it came from doing the language research for this, and those words which seem to be connected with plenty and abundance. When I would sit there and meditate on them, they created what felt to me like a state of unhindered flow. So this is what my meditations have been on for the last 6 weeks. And what I decided in my reflections in preparing for this class is it's actually easier to experience our abundance when we are tapped into the flow of God's energy moving in and through us. So I highly recommend cultivating a daily habit of tuning into the divine. This is, in the concept of success, this is essential. And going back to what Summer brought up earlier of that sense of self-satisfaction, nothing will tune you into a sense of pleasure more than this process will as a daily activity. And part of the concept of flow is also in this process of meditation, you want to picture yourself as a conduit, that it's not getting stuck. Basically, it's moving in and through you. So I want everyone to take a moment before we enter class and just to sort of close your eyes and sit comfortably. I'm going to do a very brief guided meditation, and it's the meditation that I'm working with every morning right now. Sit comfortably in an upright position with your feet placed firmly against the floor and your palms open. Let your body relax and let all tension slide away. Imagine the divine presence in the form of a beam of light penetrating the top of your head, moving down to your heart and out of your heart to fill up the room around you. Each day, try and project that light out just a little further into the world around you. Now imagine the divine presence in the form of vital, energetic life force moving out of your heart and filling up the room around you. You are encompassed in the feeling of aliveness. Each day, try and project that feeling of aliveness out just a little further in the world around you. And now imagine a profound feeling of love and compassion and interconnectedness with all of life, streaming from your heart and out of your heart and filling up the room around you. For some, it can be helpful to imagine the face of a loved one, family member, or even a pet to trigger the emotion of love. Each day, try and project your love energy out just a little further in the world around you. When you are ready, bring your attention back to the room and to the present moment. That is part of your homework, and it's in your notes. Move through this. Your next exercise is going to be part of your homework for this week, before we get into hardcore astrology, is I want you to spend the week thinking about appreciation.
Christopher?
Yes?
In that meditation, were you keying in on particular planets? No?
Just life, and love. It's the energies that we use as symbols in our tradition to be that Trinity of Godhead. And what I do, if I ever do a planetary energy, Vicki, I might imagine the light moving through me as being like gold dust.
Like what?
Gold dust. You know, I'll pick up one of those small, sometimes you'll find at souvenir shops these little vials of gold leaf that's been hammered out into, you know, milla whatevers. And I try to use that as imagining that as the light energy. So, appreciation. Yes, gratitude is the best attitude. We always want to give to or do more for those persons that show gratitude and appreciation for our efforts. Here's a wonderful quote from Brother David Steindl-Rast. Gratefulness is the key to a happy life that we hold in our hands, because if we are not grateful, then no matter how much we have, we will not be happy. Because we will always want to have something else or something more. So your other homework for this week, and I will tell you, I also do the homework, and there's such great benefits to doing it. And what I've been working on for the last 6 weeks is what I call my gratitude list. Looks something like that. So mine I have in a wonderful leather-bound notebook, so there's always a ritual. And I get up at 5 in the morning, and I sit and I do that meditation, and then I pull out my ritual notebook and I start writing in it. And what I do is I make a list of what maybe persons, abilities I have, things in my life that I'm grateful for. And it's, the only limit is your imagination. And I recommend adding at least 5 things to it daily, which there's not much effort in that. Usually you can come up with that. And then what I do in the morning is I'll often go back and review what I've written in earlier days. And it's also a great note to end your day on, is going back and reviewing your list, because it can actually put you in a happier mood before going to bed, rather than snarling over some unkind remark you might have received during the day, or somebody who has irritated or annoyed you, or you made the mistake of watching the news before going to bed. So this is a really helpful process. Another quote. My background is in Catholicism, so I find a lot of useful information from that. And this quote comes from Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, who was a Jesuit priest and philosopher. We are not human beings having a spiritual experience. We are spiritual beings having a human experience. To me, that's what the cycle of necessity tells us. So, there you go. Oh, look, we're ending 3 minutes early. Your homework is basically there in your notes. In addition to the meditation and the gratitude list, you don't have to get up at 5 like I do. That I won't hold you to. Just fit it in somewhere in your life. It's worth every minute. But also, this will be less fun. But this week, during the course of the week, reflect on some of the most painful experiences of your life. Write them down, what happened, who was there, and then what you gained from it. You don't have to bring it to school. You don't have to share it with me, anyone in the room, or with the world at large on the video class. This is purely for you, but it's, if life is a schooling that has painful and pleasurable experiences, it's important for us to get in the habit of looking at what we perceived as being so painful, the lover left you, or the time you were in the hospital, whatever it is, and what was actually gained from that experience. Because chances are you could have painful experiences in the future, and it'd be good to be prepared to know how to process them. And then, I have an affirmation for you, which is, I, include your name, know that God is the source of all my good. And just start running that through your mind this week, especially whenever you find yourself moving towards some of those words that we used earlier that have to do with privation, dearth, limitation, restriction. Anything that blocks the thing that is the feeling of flow, switch into this as a mantra or affirmation whenever you feel that restriction coming upon you. I've already discussed what the classes are. This is in the very bottom of your handouts or your notes. And, somehow the recommended reading didn't end up there, but it is in your handouts. And that's that. And you don't have to have those books, but any of you that want those books over the next 6 weeks, they're available in our bookstore. And now, at the end of the class, I see a hand in the back.
Back when you were talking about awards, Renee from British Columbia said the constellation Corona, Australia, is the laurel crown for the Poets Award.
Right, the laureate crown.
Yeah.
Crown laureate. All right, are there any questions related to tonight's class before you all run out of
In
here?
your list of readings, did you repeat one of the references, or did you mean to put something else in that place?
I probably repeated it since
You've got 4 references. I'm just wondering whether one of them we might have put down You've got occultism applied, organic alchemy, and then occultism applied, and then delineating the horoscope. So it's a
Well, I was actually working at the Department of Redundancy Department that day. And,
You mean you really want us to read occultism applied?
that or my cut and paste button was hyperactive.
Okay,
What
so-
book did you have in mind?
Thank you for pointing that out.
Did you have another book in mind?
Yeah.
Laws of Occultism.
Oh, okay.
Laws of occultism. That's
Yeah.
the one.
And around here, one can be interrupted, distracted, spoken to, and forget what they're doing.
And the phone rings.
Yeah,
Well, I
phone
just didn't want to miss out.
emails pop up on the screen.
I just
No,
didn't want
thank
to
you.
miss out on another gem.
Actually, those were all books, that is a gem, and they're all
Yeah.
books that I had quoted in tonight's class. I'm drawing this class from across several of the disciplines in our teachings.
Thanks.
Any further questions? Okay.
Oh, well, it's just more like a comment, but it's kind of personal. You know, the focus on the painful episodes for people like me, it's real easy to do that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and for me, I also find a nice alternative one is to actually focus on some really highlight experiences, because sometimes I don't appreciate them and what I've really received through them or learned through them. So I may
I think
do
we'll work
that.
on that one in 3 weeks.
Oh.
But just for this week, I only want you to look at the painful experiences, not from how badly they hurt. Because, again, she's pointing out something very good. If any of you have a prominent Neptune, the thing about thinking about an experience from the past is you can recreate those emotional experiences. So I want you to think about it from an observational point of view, rather than getting every sensation, you know, if it was the guy with the, the dagger in the shower or something. I don't want you to put yourself into, again, a state of post-traumatic stress disorder. But try and look at these experiences from an observational, detached view, only with the aim in sight of what you learned from that. I mean, it could be crashing your car. Anything that's ever happened to us, I generally think something has been learned, something's been gained, or a skill has been developed through the, even the process of dealing with bureaucracies will sometimes teach us skills.
And it's
So
easy to overlook them too.
it's so easy. That's what I want you to think right now.
Well, the theory in the Brotherhood of Light stuff is that you just keep attracting experiences. If you don't resolve them, if you don't really get what it is that you need to learn, right?
There is that, and I'm not sure that I should tell everyone this in the first class, but there's also the theory that once you do get a skill, sometimes you get bigger and better
Versions.
Yeah, I mean, I see this in Barbara's life quite frequently in terms of what I call the cases that come into her life that she has to resolve. Sometimes when you've become accomplished in a certain area, it doesn't mean that you stop doing that. Sometimes you're given bigger and better cases to handle, because it's part of this building a skill base. And that's why, again, when we go back and look at the traumatic events of life and what the skills were earned from them, and we think about it just in the sense of this cycle of necessity. Where do we come from? What are we doing here? Life is a schooling, pleasure and pain. Pain is the teacher, pleasure is the reward. It changes the perspective, and it'll help set us up for when we start to actually juggle charts in the class. Any other questions? All right.
Should we register with you guys? Write down our name and birthday?
Oh,
Yes,
yeah,
yes,
please
let's
do. Vicky will handle that.
Alright.
Do you want to, Barb, do you want to read who's on tonight so we know who our distant viewers are?
You have Alice Marie.
Hi, Alice Marie.
Thank you for an excellent class. Cindy from
So,
Virginia.
make sure
Thank
that's the
you
right chart.
For a very enlightening class. Renee, Yuri from Indiana, Terry from Albuquerque, Susan, Santa Monica. Dorothy, I think that's all.
Okay.
There's about 8 people on.
Great. Well, thank you all for coming, and see you next week. All right.
Wonderful.
Thank you.